On today's show, the offseason has begun for the Hawks, and that includes exit interviews, which took place on Friday. We'll get into all of that, a new hire in the front office, as well as the resolution of the Kings pick situation, and we'll get into all that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1698 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep in the night here on a Friday evening into Saturday. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day. And please check out the show and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. That includes Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube and anywhere else you might enjoy getting podcast content. Today's show is sort of the first show of the offseason for Atlanta. If you missed anything, though, I did a full breakdown of the Hawks loss on Wednesday and the fallout from that. It's been a busy week on the show. This is the fifth episode of the week, plus bonus content as well. But just to sort of lay out what the show is going to be today, it's going to be exit interview talk for about half of the show or so. I was in attendance today at exit interviews for the Hawks as the entire roster, sans one player, basically talked. Also, Atlanta made an interesting hire today that was reported. It's not been announced, but certainly has been confirmed multiple times. And then at the very end of the show, I'll talk about the resolution for the Kings pick and all the details there. So, plenty to get to on the podcast, as you might expect. Again, the first offseason show, basically, but we're going to be here all the way through. And overall, I'll say this. I posted the complete audio, like the actual unedited audio of Quinn Snyder and Landry Fields and Trae Young, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and DeJounte Murray, all those guys on the audio-only feeds of this podcast, as well as in sort of separate feeds and actually in one big file on the YouTube page. So if you want to actually hear the context, and I think it's a good idea, especially if you're a diehard, to just listen to all of it. It's always useful context to kind of hear guys and the back and forth and all that stuff as well. Generally speaking, I would say today, extra interviews was a lot of guys who were not super happy, and that's what you would expect from a team that just lost the way that the Hawks did, the way the Hawks had this year that was underachieving all the way across the board. Everyone agrees on that. It's not like it's up for debate. Atlanta did not do what they were supposed to do this year. The word of the day, I would say, was consistency, or at least the lack thereof. Generally felt like everybody acknowledged for the most part that they did have injury issues that sort of contributed to their struggles in this season. That's fair. I don't think it's the reason why the Hawks were bad. I think it might have contributed at times at different points along the way. Of course, they were literally missed the seventh most games in the season this year total. It was the timing. It was the roster construction. They didn't say this, but I would add in particular that the roster construction was poor, in my opinion, this year. And that was magnified because they didn't have depth at forward in particular. And by the end of the year, they were playing without two of their really three forwards that they have, and Jalen Johnson and Sadiq Bey being out, plus another guy in Okongwu who played some power forward this year as well. And by the way, that can be traced back to the offseason when they let John Collins go for nothing. They traded for him for nothing, which was understandable. And the fact that they saved money and all that stuff and cleared the way, the resolution of that 3-year saga of him being on the market and trade, but they didn't get anything back for him. They didn't bring any other help either, other than just signing a 1-year minimum deal for Wes Matthews. And then they invested in the future with Mo Gay in a second round, but that's a second round rookie. You couldn't really bank on that guy playing minutes for you. So anyway, a lot of focus on the big picture today. As I said many times, this is not a brain trust that likes to share a lot of information specifically, both coach and front office. Not a lot of super candid moments, I would say, from them. Quinn Snyder does not like to talk about specifics and much of anything, honestly. He will talk about players individually and mostly in a positive direction. He likes to do that. It's obviously that's nice to see, but he doesn't really get into process a ton. He'll say a lot of words sometimes without giving a lot of information. Kind of the same with Landry Fields. I'll start there. Actually, Landry was the last person that spoke today. He got some questions about the roster, not making changes, and you can listen to that sort of full answer on the interviews that I posted before. But there wasn't a ton in the way of specifics. I will say that's sort of the same with regard to the questions that he got about Trae and DeJounte. That is, of course, the number one sort of storyline right now around the Hawks, both especially nationally, but even locally. Like, what happens with Trae and DeJounte? It's obviously if the most famous, best players get all the discussion. I get that. What the Hawks are going to try to do this summer with those guys, if anything, I do want to play you one clip though, because in part I asked the question, but also it's not about Trae DeJounte, but it's also kind of a topic lately that's relevant beyond those guys. It's about a 3-minute clip, so stay tuned for that throughout that. So bear with me on that. But you'll hear me ask about the Hawks young guys, in particular, Kobe Buffkin, AJ Griffin, etc. And that's followed by a question that I asked about Vit Krejci, because of course that's been a controversial decision for the Hawks to keep him on a 2-way deal at the end of the year and have him basically be ineligible to play on Wednesday, which certainly ended up hurting the Hawks. So all that said, here's an exchange from me and Landry going back and forth on Friday. You have a bunch of young guys who didn't necessarily have huge playing time this year due to injuries and all kinds of things. How do you approach not only the summer, but going into next year with Kobe and AJ, who was kind of in and out, played a lot more last year, Mo being banged up? Like, I know it's a lot of focus on the guys who play more minutes, but the young guys who are already in the pipeline, how do you kind of navigate those guys?
You're right. Those guys have been in and out for various reasons, and I was most proud of just their resilience. Like, every single one of those guys went through a pit, and they came out the other side, I thought, better. Not that you ever want to have to go through those, but the way that they approached it, the way that they showed humility through it, and the discovery of different things about themselves in that process, I thought was great. So if you project out into the future, what we're going to continuously do with them is maintain that mindset, maintain the fact that there are going to be things that are not in your control, and you're not going to be able to prepare for exactly what they are, but you can prepare for adversity. So what tools are we going to give them through that? What habits are they going to have to add to their routines day in and day out towards becoming the best version of themselves? So early on, and this was, especially in this last draft, a part of like the character that we want in this group. It's not something that's perfect where all of a sudden like you're the perfect person. It's more about how have you responded to these situations before, because that gives us an opportunity to then project out how you respond in the future. And to have a growth mindset that those guys do have is really important. It's very important for us. Continuously improving is a common theme here, as well as the competitiveness and perseverance, just grit. And those guys showed a lot of that, and I'm super proud of how they did that. And I would bank on the fact that they won't stop doing that in the future.
What went into the decision around V and the conversion, non-conversion? A lot of talk about that at the end of the season. Like, how do you evaluate that kind of thing? And obviously he becomes a free agent now. How do you sort of navigate that as someone too?
Vit had an incredible end of the year. Very similar to your last question about a guy's journey, different pit stages that they go through. I mean, he was here, then he wasn't here, and now he's back. And he showed us a lot of excitement towards the end of the season, and a lot of really good play. And it wasn't an easy decision with how we came to it, but leaning on our process and methodology and how we got there, I'm more than confident that was the right decision. And really trusting our group on getting there. So love Vit, want to see if we can do something for the future here with him. But a lot went into that. And a lot went into his game, and a lot of coaches spent a lot of time with him. The time that he spent in College Park, with Coach Ryan and his staff and the group that was there, all goes into that. So that's a great story today, and as he continues into the future, hopefully become a greater one.
All right, so you hear that back and forth. You get the idea there a little bit about how the specifics are not exactly flowing out of Landry in these situations. I thought it was notable, at least, that he said that he believes it's the right decision, that the way they handled Vit Krejci. I disagree with that. If you listen to the show this week, you already know that. But I think it was pretty clear that Vit would have helped them on Wednesday. I'm not saying they would have won the game with Vit, but they didn't prioritize that, sort of winning the game on Wednesday and going further in the playoffs or postseason. We'll see what kind of deal they get done with Vit this summer. There is the angle of having him sign longer term, but all that stuff, they didn't do it, and that was sort of the peek behind the curtain there. As for Quinn, I'll give you an example there as well, what I was saying earlier about how there isn't a ton of direct insight. Here's 2 questions and answers back to back. There's one on the topic of basically the topic du jour of Trae and DeJounte, and then you just kind of see what Quinn gives back in that question and answer.
What do you think is going to be something that you and Landry and Kyle and everybody, what are the main points of emphasis that you see right now that you guys will probably talk about, not just reflecting, but looking ahead to what you want to do with this team as you get into the offseason?
Yeah, well, right now for me, the opportunity to just step back for a second, get away, myself, our staff, I think that's really important. And, when we come back, I'll look for, I'll whatever opportunity, whatever input that those guys want from me, I'm happy to provide.
When I talked to you at the beginning of last season, you mentioned that, it's maybe fair is not necessarily the right word that you use, but it's unwise to maybe judge the partnership of Trae and DeJounte in year 2 as it would have been to judge it in year 1. But when you look at, maybe they didn't have enough time together to work on things, but when you look at that partnership, what did you see and maybe how can that grow moving forward? Well, first, they're both excellent players, and I think anytime you're looking at a group and analyzing the group, it's important to not focus on any 1-2 people. That it is a team and it's collective, and that's the way that I look at it. And really love having the opportunity to coach both those guys.
All right, Sin. I know it's frustrating for some people, fans-wise and not even media-wise, to not hear super specific answers and pointed answers. It is similar, I promise you, for media. It's hard to cover sometimes. I'd love to have more things to point to and be able to glean more from these, but alas, that's kind of not where we are right now. So they can be pushed a little bit. That certainly happened. And again, I'd recommend listening to all of it back and forth. But this is not exactly a team that's going to be set up to have their decision makers make a ton of news at something like this. So keep that in mind all the way through. I will have more on the player side. I will have audio from Trae Young on this podcast and some notes of what the players said. And again, some more talk about the Kings pick at the end of the show and more. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is sponsored by Yahoo Finance. And when it comes to your financial future, you'd think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can, but now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what financial experts and greats use, and that is Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one place. They're the #1 financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. You can also link your brokerage accounts securely for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. And a comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, is also how Yahoo Finance ensures that you'll have the best insights, look over your wealth in its entirety. They have a community of over 90 million users each month, and the real strength there is the helping you along your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, and that is yahoofinance.com. The #1 financial destination is yahoofinance.com. One more time, that is yahoofinance.com. Today's show is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook, and it's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing as well, and FanDuel Sportsbook is also the place to be for each and every game. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 in your pocket you can use to bet on hoops, baseball, hockey, and so much more. Bet all of your favorite baseball and basketball players with teams with quick bets and live same-game parlays, as well as exclusive props and much more. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is really easy to use. They have all stuff you're looking for across the sports betting space, from over-unders to money lines to player props, future bets, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure, and covers the entire range of sports as well. Not only the NBA, which of course they're there, but also football stuff when that's in season, MLB, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. And now is also time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook, and the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and to the player side of exit interviews, as I said sort of briefly earlier, only 2 players actually did not speak to the media. One is Saddiq Bey, who's been away from the team for a while. He's rehabbing from the torn ACL. That was not a huge surprise. The other guy that did not talk is DeAndre Hunter. That was more of a surprise. We never actually got an explanation for why he didn't talk. He was with the team on Wednesday in Chicago. He didn't play well in that game, but occasionally you'll have a free agent that does not come to exit interviews, but DeAndre is not a free agent. He has 3 years left on his deal. So that was a bit of a surprise. I don't know what to make of that, but he did not talk. Everybody else did. Trae Young, of course, got the most attention, as he always does around the Hawks. And the one thing that kind of made the rounds the most was a quote about him wanting to win. I would say some people tweeted a tiny part of that answer, and in a not so surprising twist, it got misconstrued a little bit around the internet. So just to be very clear, here's a full clip of the answer and the question from Allison Mastrangelo at WSB and Trae. So here's that back and forth right now.
There will be a
always some talk at the end of a season about maybe changes that need to be made and maybe movements. Do you want to be here next year? Do you still believe in this team that they can be a championship team down the years?
Yeah, I mean, every year teams are different. I mean, obviously, I want to be here. I mean, I want to be here, but I want to win too. So, I mean, obviously, like, I mean, I've said that since I've been here. Like, I want to be here. I want to win championships here and do that. But I want to win. So, I mean, that's pretty much all it is for me. That's my motto, and that's been me from the beginning.
When you say I want to win, though, do you believe that can be here with the Hawks, or do you believe it's somewhere else?
No, I believe it can be here. We just gotta make it happen.
So obviously you hear there that, it's clear that winning is what he wants to have happen. He also said multiple times, though, in that answer and multiple ways that he wants to be in Atlanta. So you hear what you want to hear there. Obviously, you could try to misconstrue it or construe it, I should say, no matter what you want to kind of take that. I thought it was a pretty normal answer that a guy would give who's competitive and wants to win. But if you want to focus on the word "but" in there, I get that too. So I wanted to play the whole answer to have your own decisions be made. We'll talk about plenty in the next couple of weeks and months about the decisions in the backcourt. Obviously, I do think that it remains more likely than not. I'm not saying guaranteed. If you ask me this question, I would just say it's more likely than not that the Hawks will not hang on to both Trae and DeJounte for another year. But they could trade. I think DeJounte being traded is probably the most likely scenario, but plenty to get into, and maybe that'll change in the coming days. But that was what Trae had to say about that topic. This is also kind of related, but Trae gave an interesting quote about the notion that he has to be the best player on every team that he's on. It actually started from kind of an odd place. I'm going to play the question for you now, because the question was actually about what he might tell another player about coming to Atlanta. But here's that whole exchange and what Trae had to say about not necessarily being the best player on the team.
If there's a player who's looking for a place the next season, when he talk to you, what would you tell him?
About here?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much I can talk. I don't know what tampering and what's not.
I don't mean like that, but I mean, you got a conversation that says what's happening in Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd let them know that they came here. People don't understand. Like, I don't mind. Like, people may think that I have to feel like I'm the best player on the team or first option on. Like, I mean, I'm not that way. I've never been that way. So I'm just a guy that's trying to get everybody involved and win the game. And I know when we win, everybody eats. So that's just been my motto since I was in high school, college. So being the best player on my team doesn't matter. Being the second doesn't matter. Like, I just want to win. So if I was telling somebody that's probably what I'd tell them, and let them know that they came here. They're going to have a point guard that's going to get them the ball and make sure that they're in the best positions for themselves and for our team to win.
Elsewhere, there wasn't a ton more to talk about. I mean, he said that he'll take a couple more weeks off to get the finger back to 100%. He's not quite there after sort of this entire saga. And I said on the show on Wednesday, I'll say it again. I think personally he probably shouldn't have played, but he likes to play and certainly he worked hard to come back. So I don't blame him for that. But I think he's not quite 100%, which he kind of acknowledged today. Also got questions about Team USA. He said, I think there's a quote was that it's kind of a hard roster to make. Obviously, that's true. The process is different now. He referenced that as well as sort of talking about what Kyrie said on the record about how they used to do this workout process where they kind of whittled the team down, had more of a tryout. This time around, they're just selecting the team. The way I would say this is like once Trae did not get picked for the World Cup team, where I actually thought he should have been on the team given who was there and who wasn't. Once that didn't happen, I thought it was pretty unlikely he was going to be picked for 2024. So I was not surprised, but he's not going to be on the team. And there you go. DeJounte talked about how much he loves Quinn Snyder. That was notable to me. Also, I asked him about his focus for the offseason, and he said the biggest goal for the summer for him is just to get basketball-wise, is just to get physically stronger, and he's working on that. That's a good idea for DeJounte. Obviously, there's limitations there. Like he's just a skinny guy by nature, but him getting stronger would be a good idea. That's a good focus for him. Jalen Johnson said the ankle is getting better every day. Obviously, that's what cost him a lot of time this year at the end. He's going to be aiming to get that right. He actually answered a question by Caleb Johnson in 92-9 of the game in Atlanta and said he's actually planning to change shoes potentially. Also considering wearing an ankle brace moving forward on that, but obviously he's going to focus on strengthening the ankle. He focused on that a lot and what he talked about today. So no surprise, but it was a really great year for Jalen in a lot of ways until that, and still upbeat despite the way it ended. I thought Capella and Bogdanović were the two guys who were the most like open and honest and candid, as they kind of almost always are. Like they were kind of the veteran leaders in some respects. They reference consistency issues, mentality stuff. Bogey said he thought the team didn't sacrifice enough, which got construed, I think, negatively when I tweeted it out. Like, he used the word we, like that doesn't really remove himself from it. I think that's fair to say for a team. It's nothing that was said. I'll say it this way. Nothing was said was particularly inflammatory. Like, it was just kind of what you'd expect to hear from a team that just won 36 games and was disappointing. Like, no one was very happy. They were all kind of talking about like what went wrong, and without like pouring gasoline, like saying that they didn't sacrifice enough is like a pretty normal quote. But anyway, that was what those guys talked about mostly. Capella talked about defense a lot, which is not a surprise. That's obviously his role in the team. I think everyone acknowledged, not just Clint, that the defense was the problem this year. They didn't run from that. It was talked about a lot. The stats were brutal. They are what they are. I keep getting asked on radio interviews this week, like, what's the number one problem for the Hawks? It's the defensive end of the floor. Like, while the focus is going to be on DeJounte and Trae, part of that's, I guess, defense too, because they are just inherently small, and that's a challenge when you're that small. But the biggest thing for this Hawks team is, like, you just cannot be as bad as they've been defensively for this long and think you're going to win a lot of games. That's the reality. Bogey said, basically talked a lot about how he feels good physically, which is great. I mean, I referenced it earlier this week once, but Bogey led the team in games played, which is a shocking development. Bogey's had lots of knee issues. Even when he's played, he's not always been 100%, but he's been upbeat about that. It's great that he finished the year healthy, especially for a guy he's on extension now that's pretty team-friendly, honestly, with the way he played this year. He had a really good year overall. I think he also might be the only guy playing for the Hawks in the Olympics. In fact, right now, I know he is the only guy slated to play in the Olympics on the Hawks roster, so keep an eye on that. It's going to be a long summer for him. Hopefully, if you're a Hawks fan, Bogey will take it easy to some degree. He won't be when they actually play games because it's the Olympics. They're going to play hard. But it's kind of a long summer for a guy who's going to play in the Olympics. Like, it's going to be a while before, obviously, he'll have a little bit of a rest time, but it won't be a full break for him this summer. V. Krejci. Speaking of V. Krejci, we talked about earlier, he got asked, I think it was by Caleb Johnson again, about what the communication was around the contract at the end. Not a ton of answers. I would say no details there. He did say that everyone agreed that they like him, which is very clear. I referenced earlier, but like Landry gave kind of an answer about that. It was not super satisfying. Beat said he wants to stay here explicitly. He did say that. He's decided to keep it building on the progress that he's made throughout the season. I think he's going to sign in Atlanta. Obviously, he's restricted, so he can't really get away unless the Hawks let him, which they're probably not going to do. But we'll see what the deal looks like when it actually happens. And not a ton else. I mean, little things from Garrison and Wes Matthews and Mo Gay and Kobe Buffkin. Like, everybody talked, and it was pretty normal, but not a lot of news being made. And we'll obviously focus on Summer League at some point, where I think you'll probably see Buffkin. I think you'll probably see Gay. Any draft picks. You could even see AJ. Lundy's going to be there, I would imagine. So that'll be a busy time in a couple of months on the young guys. And, there you go on that. Before we get into the end of the show with regard to the Kings pick, one bit of news, actually, that was not exit interview related. I teased it before, but the Hawks made actually a front office hire. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN reported that the Hawks are hiring Ansi Sala, I believe is the way you would say that. I'm guessing there's not been a pronunciation guy that I've seen so far, but he's going to be the new assistant GM of the Hawks, at least one of them. He was the VP of basketball strategy and team counsel with the Golden State Warriors prior to this, worked for the Spurs before that. So two pretty good trusted organizations that he's been a part of. I was told behind the scenes and confirmed that the Hawks, number one, are hiring him, but also that he's not replacing anyone else. That assistant GM title that he was given, or at least been reported by Woj, scared some folks because obviously that's Kyle Korver's job. But Korver's not going anywhere. I saw him today. He was in the facility. Like, he's still the assistant GM. You can have multiple assistant GMs. That's important to note. So, and also even in Woj's tweet, it said he is being hired as an assistant GM, not the assistant GM. So another name in the building. That's kind of the biggest takeaway there. I've heard some very, very good things about him. He's got cap expertise and CBA expertise. He's not limited to that either. It's not just that. But I went and found an entry from Steve Kerr at a press conference in October about him and called him an outstanding human being. Said he's really mellow and chill, but also pretty brilliant. So, again, that's the league consensus of people that I know. That's not a huge sample size. I asked around as much as I possibly could today. I don't know the man, never met him, but rave reviews. So, big picture, he's not going to make decisions. Like, it's a complicated brain trust. I've said this before a lot, but Landry Fields is the GM. He's not a decision-making GM like some others are around the league. In fact, he probably has less power than a lot of GMs around the league because you have a very, very, very active owner. You have Kyle's there. You have Quinn. You have Chris Grant. Now you have another guy in the front office. Like, they have a lot of voices. You got Nick Ressler still in the building somewhere. Like, there's lots and lots and lots of people in the mix here. This is another one. But again, rave reviews for Ansi Salah, and we'll see what that looks like. But that's an interesting hire, and one that I think is a good idea, generally speaking, from what I can sort of glean. A modern voice, a cap guy, a CBA expert. Like, that's all good stuff that you want when you're planning long term, especially with constraints that the Hawks have given themselves. But I'll leave it there for now. But that was an interesting bit of news that dropped on Friday post exit interviews, because if that actually happened early in the morning, I would have asked about it, but it was not reported till after. So there you go on that. All right, we'll have more coming up at the end of the podcast on the Kings pick. I know you're waiting for my analysis of that whole fallout here at the end of the evening. That's why I'm recording this podcast so late into the night. But before we get to that stuff, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for a small business, you want to be finding quality professionals that are right for your roles that you have available. That's why LinkedIn Jobs is an amazing place to check out. They have the tools to actually find the right professionals for your team. They do it faster, and they do it for free. I've been on the hunt for people to hire at my day job a few different times before, and the folks at LinkedIn Jobs have been huge, making the whole process easy and efficient. They know that small businesses really are often wearing a ton of different hats. They might not have time or resources to actually make the entire process so onerous that it can be. But at LinkedIn, it's not just another job board. They do a great job, and also they have a network of more than 1 billion professionals, with a B, 1 billion, which makes it the best possible place to find someone to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else, and they do it while making the process easy and intuitive for you. Hiring is much, much easier when you have that many quality candidates at your fingertips. It's so easy, in fact, that 86% of business get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. They also make the process easy for you, and 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn Jobs for hiring purposes. Post your job for free by going to linkedin.com/lockedonnba. One more time, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Terms and conditions apply. All right, and before the end of the show today, some resolution, and forgive me for a little bit of a preamble here, because I know a lot of people understand the situation, but I always get questions about what is happening with the Kings pick, and now we have the final answer for this year anyway. So coming into the season, it was as simple as this. If the Kings made the playoffs, and by the playoffs, I mean the 8-team playoffs in the Western Conference. There's postseason, which includes the play-in, but the actual playoffs is 8 teams. If they made the playoffs, the Hawks would get their pick this year, their first-round pick in 2024. If the Kings did not make the 8-team playoffs, that pick was going to roll over to 2025 and potentially beyond that, and that ultimately resolved, and the latest it possibly could have, in the second play-in game on Friday. The Kings lost to the Pels, and by proxy, they missed the playoffs, which means the Hawks do not get their pick this year. It becomes top 12 protected in 2025, which means the Hawks will get that pick next year if the Kings either make the playoffs or barely miss it and pick 13th or 14th in the draft. Then, if it doesn't come next year, it starts getting pretty close to being dangerous for Atlanta, because it's only top 10 protected in 2026, which is obviously a little bit favorable on some level for Atlanta, which means the Hawks get the pick if it lands anywhere outside of the 11 spot. But if the Kings miss the playoffs for 2 more years, again, it's not just 1 more year, it's 2 more years. That's obviously some wiggle room there. If they miss the playoffs 25 and 26, that pick never becomes a first-round pick. It actually becomes second-round picks that the Kings will get to send to Atlanta. There's actually 2 of those. And while that isn't necessarily nothing, I think second-round picks can have some value. That is a much, much worse outcome. So obviously that is 2 years away. It would require the Kings to be underwhelming for 2 straight seasons more. But before last year, the Kings were basically the laughingstock of the league for 15 years. Now, they've been pretty good the last 2 years. Last year, they were in the playoffs. This year, they were a 46-win team. So that gives you some optimism on some level. But if they regress at all and end up in the lottery next year again, it gets a little bit dangerous. So don't get me wrong on this. The Hawks are still more likely than not going to get a first-round pick from this deal that involved Kevin Huerter. But it is not a lock. It never was, and it's even less so now, because this was a good opportunity for the Hawks to get a pick that was locked into that mid-first round range, and now it's not assured. So I won't do the whole thing again, but there was a debate happening in certain corners of Hawks Twitter and Hawks land in general about whether the Hawks should even want the pick this year or not. I thought it was a pretty close call. Not that it matters anymore, obviously, now, because it was and also it was never in the Hawks' control, so they weren't like picking. It was just more a rooting interest than anything else. Many have pointed to the fact that next year's draft is better than this year's draft, and I would agree with that. Just to be very clear, I would agree with that. And that's a reason why they might have wanted it to roll over. But at the same time, you cannot guarantee that pick is going to come overall. If you could, if all you knew was that it was next year's pick against this year's pick, I would take it next year too. I really would. But because there is that downside risk of maybe never getting it at all, that swings it for me anyway narrowly to I would have preferred it come this year. Part of that also is that we already knew if the Kings won on Friday, the pick was going to be in that 15, 16, 17 range, which is, again, not anything crazy, but that's a good outcome for a pick that was lottery protected to start with. To get a pick in the top 17 or 18 is a pretty good spot, even though, again, this draft is bad. But my personal opinion is the top of the draft is the part that is really, really bad this year. By the time you get to the middle of the draft, it's not great, but it isn't like this complete disaster in the way that it might be framed at the top. At the top, I really hate it. But anyway, so for me, this is my opinion slightly. I would have preferred for the Hawks to get it this year, but it is kind of a risk-reward thing in some ways. Now, obviously, the Hawks couldn't choose, but there is more upside with it rolling over because you could, pick a little bit higher next year, as high as 13, and also the draft is a little bit better. The year after, you can pick as high as 11. But the downside risk is that you go from maybe this year getting a 15th, 16th, 17th pick to potentially never getting a first-round pick at all. And that would be a huge drop-off. So I won't tell anybody how to feel about this. There's mixed reactions. That's how I feel about it. And again, the Hawks couldn't change this at all. So they were just rooting either way. And they would never tell you what they were rooting for. But it is what it is. The pick is now rolling over 2025. The Hawks now, by the way, have only one total pick in 2024 right now. That can always change. They could make a trade to get a pick in this draft at some point in the second round, but they don't have their second round pick this year. So they only have one total pick in 2024 at this moment. I did get a question before I started recording the podcast about whether the Hawks and Kings could agree on basically the Kings just saying, go ahead and take the pick if you want it. They could do that if it was both teams agreeing. The Kings can't choose to send their pick to the Hawks unilaterally. The Hawks would have to say yes to that. Same thing on the other side. The Hawks can't just request it. But yes, it is not likely. It is not something that happens often. But the two teams could conceivably agree to kind of just do the deal now and have the Kings give the pick to the Hawks. I'd be shocked by that, but it is allowed. So just to answer the question, there you go. It's allowed. But for me, as of April 19th, now 20th, as I'm recording this podcast, the Hawks have one pick in the upcoming draft, and it is only their own first-round pick. Speaking of which, some numbers on that draft pick, because the Hawks, as I mentioned a little bit briefly on Wednesday night, are in the lottery. That's the upside, so to speak, of not making the playoffs, is that you're in the lottery. And they're going to enter the lottery in the number 10 slot going into the lottery. That means they have a 65.9% chance to pick at number 10 in the draft. So by far, about 2/3 of the time, they'll be picking at exactly number 10 in the draft. A 19% chance to go down one slot to number 11. That is the second most likely spot. So essentially, there's about an 85-ish% chance, 86% chance to pick either 10 or 11 in the draft in June. But there's also a 14% chance to go up into the top four, between 3% and 4% at each of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 14% chance is not super duper high, but it's obviously plausible. That's 1 out of every 6 or so, something like that. 1 out of every 7 or so, I should say. So yeah, it's doable, but you can't bank on that, obviously. There also is a tiny chance that the Hawks could pick worse than 11th. It's only about 1.2% that they could pick in the 12-13 range, but it's at least possible. They can't go below 14, but they could fall a little bit, and it would take some pretty monumental math to get to below 12, honestly. So if the Hawks had made the playoffs, it would have been the 15th pick of the draft. So keep that in mind. That's a little bit of a swing. Even in a bad draft, going up 4 or 5 spots, potentially, at least projected, is a real move. That would have cost you some real capital to trade up, quote unquote, in a draft like this. Instead, the pick just becomes yours at 10 or 11. So in the end, again, 86% chance or so to pick 10 or 11. The gap between 11 and 15 is a pretty decent chunk. And yes, one more time, this draft is not very good. But the draft in this range is not like appalling. There's a lot of talent that's still going to be there. The top is the part that I don't love, and I think that there are going to be guys that I will like in this range. We'll get into that plenty. If you are a new listener that just found the podcast this year, perhaps, you may not know this. I do a ton of draft content, and we have about 2 months now between now and the draft. So I would say at least half, if not more than that, of the content between now and the draft is going to be draft related on this feed. So please subscribe. We'll have a full deep dive into players. I already did a little bit with Ben Pfeiffer and Brian Schroeder already in the cycle. Those should be in your feeds from previous months. But full speed ahead to the draft from this point forward. We'll also have some player review stuff. All that's going to be in the feed as well. So it won't just be draft. There'll be plenty of draft, I promise you, between now and the actual day, which is, again, about 2 months away at this stage. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed that deep dive into the exit interview stuff, the draft stuff, etc. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube as well on the video side. Please tell a friend about the show. Subscribe across platforms, download across platforms, spread the word for us. I would very much appreciate that. We are in off-season mode, but we're still going to be doing regular episodes 3, 4, 5 times a week. So stay tuned, and we'll see you all next time.